I'm gonna go ahead and start recording and we'll jump into this. So, welcome everybody to this little rally for the roadless rule. I just want to thank each of y'all for coming this evening and joining us. You're going to hear from some really powerful voices tonight about the roadless rule and be given some tools to kind of go out and try to advocate and organize on behalf of the rule as well. And so, hoping that you get a little bit of the history, kind of the know-how, and then we'll dive into the what we do about it. One of the things I love the most about these webinars is as we're talking about the rule or talking about all the bad stuff, somebody inevitably goes into the chat and goes, what the heck can I do to support this or stop X or Y or Z? And we're gonna have some of that too. And these are some of the organizations that were a part of this. So Endangered Species Coalition, Mountain True, Sierra Club, and Trout Unlimited. And I'll introduce all my panelists in just a moment. But I want to hear, where are y'all coming in from? How you heard about the webinar, right? So maybe which organization told you? Maybe you saw it on social media, your email, and then your favorite public land, right? Where do you like to go? What land that you own, along with all of us, do you appreciate the most? Um, Email, okay, good to know where our reach is. Maryland, a lot of folks from the email. Facebook, social media can work sometimes. I'm glad to hear that. It's not just people being mean to each other in the comments. Email, awesome. Okay, cool, folks. And I know a lot of y'all let me know where you're at. Missouri, email. Western North Carolina and the Mountain True getting a special shout out. And I'm right there with you. Pisgah's my favorite. So great. Cool, y'all. Well, now let's introduce us. So we'll go left to right. I'm going to go ahead and let Chris introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Wood, and I work for Trout Unlimited in our intergalactic headquarters in Arlington, Virginia.
Awesome, Chris. And Danny?
Hi, folks. I'm Danny Purvis. I'm the Wildlands Chair for the Georgia chapter of Sierra Club, and I'm also on the board for Wild Cumberland. So, Georgia represent. I'm calling in from Missoula, Montana today.
Then it's me. So I'm Dalton George. I'm the organizing director for the Endangered Species Coalition. I'm in Boone, North Carolina, which is a small mountain town kind of close to Asheville. And then I'll let Donovan round us out.
Hey y'all, I'm Donovan Green. I am the Resilient Forest Organizer for Mountain True, an organization based in Western North Carolina protecting the Blue Ridge Mountains. Yeah, I think that's all I have. I just want to note someone said they lost sound in the chat. I just want to make sure that we're good on that.
Yeah, Susan, I'm sorry you lost audio. Can everybody else hear us? Is that on her end or okay, sound okay. Good. We just want to make sure before we roll on. Thanks for that. And I see a hand. We'll do some Q&A at the end, y'all, so just stick with us. Um, and then here's an agenda, the overview, right? So we're introductions and agenda. We just did that. We're going to have an overview of the roadless rule and kind of what's going on, the current attacks on it. Chris is going to help us understand that, talk a bit about the history and his own personal fight with the roadless rule. Then we're going to talk about organizing and advocacy in support in the rule. What can we do in our communities? What can we do on behalf of the rule? We're going to break that down into some local actions. You'd be surprised what you can do for a federal policy in your own community. We'll give you some examples. National actions. So who do you need to call? Who do you need to email? What does that look like? And then we're going to give you this handy dandy toolkit that's going to give you all the information that we talked about tonight and more. You'll be a roadless rule expert if you just go through the whole thing and listen to this. And we'll close out and let y'all get back to your evening. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce Chris, who really was key in the adoption of the roadless rule. I'm sure he's going to talk about that history, but it's a real treat to have him tonight. And so, Chris, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Dalton. It's a real pleasure to be here. Before I took on the best job in America at Trout Unlimited, I used to work for the United States Forest Service, and I worked for um, basically the CEO of the organization. They call that person the chief. And in fact, my um, brothers, in jest, when they found out that I worked for a guy whose title was chief, made me a card that I still have, a business card that said Chris Wood, and then underneath it, Medicine Man, because I work for the chief. But one of the things that we did, we were trying to reestablish the Forest Service as a conservation giant, and the agency was in the midst of really probably a decade long transition. because from 1960 to 1989, the Forest Service had harvested about 9 to 12 billion board feet of timber per year from national forest system lands. And um, it became an immensely and intensely controversial practice, especially the harvest of these remote landscapes, especially old growth, but in particular roadless areas, these larger landscapes of the national forest system that hadn't been designated as wilderness, but had wilderness qualities to them. And that was what we walked into when Mike became the chief in the late 1990s, 1997. And what we did at first, because the agency was holding this backlog of maintenance on its existing road system, which is incredibly boring, I know, but we're talking about an $8.5 billion maintenance backlog on existing roads. And so our idea was, well, let's take a pause on building roads. We can't afford to take care of the roads we already have. We've got a 270,000-mile road system. It's much, much larger than the interstate highway system. Why don't we, and we're almost $10 billion in the hole in taking care of these roads. Let's just take a pause on road construction. And that's what we did initially. And then the the response to that proposal was so intense, and it was so obvious that what the American people really cared about these roadless areas for was their sense of wildness and openness and naturalness. And what they didn't care about was having another mile of road to access a campground or access a hiking trail because we had so many of them. And so ultimately, we went through a process. It lasted about 18 months. We had over 600 public meetings around the United States, in all the towns, by the way. Every town that I saw flash up on the screen, we had a public meeting. We had over 1.5 million comments, 94% of which were positive, basically advocating protecting these so-called roadless areas. And that was the context by which the rule was developed. But there's more to it than even that. The year before we proposed this so-called roadless area conservation rule, the House of Representatives had come within a single vote of cutting off 80% of the Forest Service's roads budget. And you might say, well, that's okay. If you've got too many roads already, you can't take care of the ones you have. Who cares if you're cutting off the roads budget? Well, the vast majority of the Forest Service road budget was about taking care of existing roads. And what happens when you don't take care of these roads, these aren't like roads on nice flat surfaces like we have across the United States. These are mountainous roads. And when you don't take care of these mountainous roads that are, especially when they're built in the Western United States in granitic soils, erosive soils, they have a tendency to just fall off the mountain. And they cause tremendous erosion and water quality degradation. And so, we were looking at this giant roads maintenance backlog of $8.5 billion. We had the House of Representatives coming in within a single vote of cutting our roads budget. And the reality was that when you look at these roadless areas, they represent only 2% of the American landscape. Just they're a tiny fraction of the United States, but 25% of all of our threatened and endangered species have habitat in them. And so it just became clear that when you look at the Forest Service as an organization whose purpose, its sole purpose really, is to conserve our lands, to hold them in a safe state, literally the meaning of the root of the word conserve, it became obvious that the conservative decision, the conservation-oriented or focused decision, was to basically not develop roads. It doesn't mean that roads could never be developed. One of the things that I think has been lost in the discussion of the roadless rule is that it's an incredibly flexible tool. Forested areas on the entire national forest system represent about 19% of the entire 191 million acre national, I'm sorry, Forested roadless areas represent 19% of the entire 191 million acre national forest system. And yet, 34% of all of the hazardous fuels treatments, all the work that they do to thin forests, to try to put prescribed fire back into forests, to try to ameliorate the effects of these intense wildfires we're having across the West, have been done in roadless areas. So we've got 19% of the forested land base in the U.S. Forest Service has already received 34% of the hazardous fuels treatments, of the so-called forest health treatments. And so the idea that these are de facto wilderness areas, it's a myth. Over 80% of these areas have grazing in them. Oil and gas is allowed in them, for better or for worse. Mining is allowed in these areas. What isn't allowed is the idea that you should build a road. Now, if there's an emergency situation or you have a legal right to build a road, then you may build a road. If there's an emergency situation, like there's a fire and you need to build a road to fight a fire, you can build a road in a roadless area. And so it's a bit of a canard, the idea that we have to, undo the roadless area undo the roadless rule in order to protect these so-called roadless areas and adjacent communities from fire. And it was in that context about a year ago that the administration proposed rolling back, or the word that they use is rescinding the roadless rule. And we're all right now waiting to hear, what their proposal is. They've made clear their intent to do away with the rule, but they have to go just like we did. We went through a public process that took 18 months. 600 public meetings, 1.6 million comments, 94% of which were positive. They have to go through a similar process. And just even when they released their so-called notice of intent to rescind the roadless rule, it wasn't just 94% of the comments that were supportive of protecting roadless areas. In this case, it was 99%. It was nearly universal. This is if there was ever a solution in search of a problem, it's this one, because the problem isn't keeping roadless areas intact, it's rescinding their protection. And I think I'll stop there, Dalton, and leave a little time for others.
Well, so well said, Chris. And, it's not just the admin that's attacking the roadless rule. There was recently a move in the Senate as well by Senator Mike Lee, who everybody knows is a big opponent of public lands and in a variety of ways, is also trying to really dismantle the roadless rule. And
Yeah,
I think,
if I may on that one, Dalton,
please.
that's exactly right. And I was remiss for not mentioning that. This is all of a piece. It's all of a piece of this attack on our public lands. And, you might, if I saw one of our visitors was from Atlanta, if you're from Atlanta, you might think, well, I don't see a lot of roadless areas, in my neck of the woods. But if you never once step foot in a roadless area, if you never step foot in public lands, which is unlikely for the people who are participating in this call, I think, but these public lands, they're what's left of what defined the character of America as we moved our way westward, for better or for worse, for all of the positive and the negative that came with, the so-called manifest destiny. The roadless areas, the public lands generally, and roadless areas specifically, are quite literally the anvil upon which the character of America was hammered out as we migrated westward. And the fact that we still retain these landscapes are a vital part of our heritage. I mean, it's an absolutely essential part of what it means to be an American.
Well said. No, absolutely. And it's this public ownership model, right? And that's what's been so frustrating about this. And as we get ready to talk about the grassroots organizing opportunities, the ability to kind of elevate your community's voice, is something that's supported again by 99% of folks, right? And in the public comment by the public broadly, like so many other public lands issues. And really without a lot of oversight. I know we've been told there could be a public comment period. We've not been given one yet, right? So it's this kind of continuing shifting of the goalposts. And it's made it very hard, I think, to communicate what's going on with the rule as well. And so the hope is that we're going to give y'all some of those tools. One of the things that Chris said, right, is that this is kind of key habitat for vulnerable wildlife, threatened and endangered species galore. And me, right, as the Endangered Species Coalition guy, I'm going to do some talking about critters. That's you probably shouldn't be surprised by that. And so this is a great map from the Defenders of Wildlife. It's a partner organization that actually maps out roadless areas. And so you can go through here. If you're dorky like me, this is a fun way to spend your evening. I'm not even kidding you, and see some critters that are really cool. And we'll go to my neck of the woods, right? So over here, this is an area that I'm prone to fly fish in a good bit. We've got Trout Unlimited on the call. And you see here, this is the Jefferson National Forest. And you'll see right here, at-risk species in this roadless area. And what Chris is saying, these roads continue to kind of threaten erosion, displace habitat, right? Fracture wilderness. And additionally, ironically, we'll talk about this probably a little bit later as well, increase the risk of wildfire, right? When you encourage vehicles to go into areas and use these roads, right, and all sorts of things, you actually increase the risk of wildfire and damaging habitat of these species. So here we are in the western part of the state. That's where Donovan and I are. And folks out west, right, you'll really see the amount of land here. Another thing that might surprise you, and this will be in the toolkit as well, is to Chris's point. Well, maybe there's not a lot of green near me. Okay, so maybe it's not as important. Maybe I shouldn't call my House rep or my senator because I don't see any near me. So many Americans rely on drinking water from rivers that pass through these very areas. So it is a southeastern issue as well. It's an American issue because it's a public land issue. But we talk a lot about data centers. I know we got over 100 folks here. I doubt there's a lot of pro data center people. Why do we talk about them? Because they're bad for the environment, right? They destroy habitat and they impact clean drinking water for people and human health. It's the exact same thing this rule does, right? It provides clean drinking water. It's a human health issue as much as it is a habitat issue. And so I think it's really important that we message on that to our communities as we talk about pressing environmental issues like a data center. And you'll be getting this link. And so I'm going to pass it over to Danny, who's going to talk a bit about some of the grassroots actions that she's been up to in Georgia as we're talking about the Southeast. It's a great segue. It's like I planned that. To talk about some of the actions she's been doing in Georgia.
Thank you. Actually, Dalton and Chris lined me up really nicely. I'm going to be talking about some of the local actions that I'm doing as a volunteer, as Wildlands Chair of the Georgia chapter of Sierra Club. And I hope that anybody on this call who is not already really active in conservation or environmental organizations will feel really empowered to get involved in your own personal way. Anybody can do it. You don't have to be trained on these kinds of issues to take action. So just a little bit of level setting about Georgia and working in a state that only 5% of the land is publicly owned. There's not a huge public lands culture throughout the state. A lot of the work that we do involves first and foremost educating people. I'm currently in Montana, and it's not unusual to see wilderness and roadless advocacy just in the window fronts of downtown stores. But in Georgia, we only have 63,000 acres out of the 58 million acres of roadless areas. So while those acres are kind of small in number, they actually really pack a punch in the benefits that they provide for the state of Georgia. Georgia is one of 5 states where roadless areas protect the watersheds for over 1 million people. And actually, North Carolina is one of them, Arizona, California, and Colorado. So even though Georgia only has 63,000 acres of roadless areas, they're playing really critical roles. So just as Chris said, if you live in Atlanta, maybe you've never stepped foot in a roadless area, your tap water was protected by the headwaters that start in a roadless area of Georgia. So one thing that I wanted to do first and foremost in some of the organizing I've done for the roadless area is get people to roadless areas in North Georgia, in the Chattahoochee-Oconee National Forest, and give them a sense of place and a sense of the value of having really wild, undeveloped roadless areas and understand what's at stake if we lose those protections. So I planned an event, an outing with Georgia Sierra Club, getting about 10 folks out to the Pink Knob roadless area in the Cohutta Wilderness. And it's a small thing to go out for a weekend and experience it, but it we had a fireside chat after the event at our campgrounds and had a chance to talk about some of the nuances of roadless areas. How are they the same or different than wilderness? What's the justification for the rescission? What would happen if the rescission took place? And then what kind of actions would follow from that? And so this was a good opportunity to build a community of advocates for all of us getting together. Next slide, please. And then the follow-up action that I organized was a postcard writing event. And we had 30 people, including three of the folks who attended the outing, the Roadless area outing. And we wrote postcards to the Forest Service, uh, which I'm currently holding on to for the day that public comment reopens. And then we wrote about 70 postcards to Senate offices, asking them to consider co-sponsoring the Roadless Area Conservation Act, which would enshrine the roadless rule into law. So it's a good opportunity to educate people in a broader way about the roadless areas, bringing action to where people are already spending time. I actually call this Roadless Rule and Brews postcard writing event. So we went to a brewery whose headwaters of the watershed they source their beer water from is in the roadless area, and talked about in a very tangible way what the benefits of that roadless area are and how that directly translates to the delicious beer that we enjoy, and all of the outdoor recreation events that so many people benefit from. And next slide. And the maximizing some of these actions is going from all of that grassroots energy that we're building up by meeting with people, getting them involved, educated, and then as a grass tops leader in September for National Wilderness Week, I plan to set up meetings with some of these Senate offices that we mailed postcards to and use the energy of the public and their concerns about the roadless rule to continue these conversations about getting our elected officials to co-sponsor a bill that would, protect the roadless rule for as long as possible. So there are a lot of ways that we as just regular everyday citizens can get involved, get people engaged, and I'll also just as a last final thought, I'll say that I got to see in a really tangible way how getting people to roadless areas and giving them that sense of place and that sense of connection actually translated to stronger advocacy when we hosted the postcard writing event, because one of our attendees from the backpacking outing came and brought several friends with him to the postcard writing event, and then they got engaged and involved. Another attendee wrote something like 20 postcards to 20 Senate offices, uh, Georgia senators, all of the members of the Senate Ag Committee, just really getting people passionate, understanding what's at stake, and then giving them opportunities to take action, I think can be really tremendously impactful. And that's me.
So good, Danny. I will just say to everybody, look at an example of Danny's postcard. Just a great message right there. And also the point of just creating opportunities for people to get involved. This is something that's so incredibly popular. And you'll find that when you tell people what's going on, when you try to educate your community and let them know in a tangible way what this means to the areas that they love or the drinking water that they rely on, you'd be surprised at how much they want to help. And I just think that story is so awesome, Danny, about this person being totally fired up and bringing people along with them. And now we've got Donovan, who's going to talk a little bit about the work they've been doing with Mountain True.
Woo! All right. I have a lot of notes and I'm probably gonna try to hit the high points because we'll be here for 2 hours if I talk about all the things I want to say. But hey, I'm Donovan Green. I'm the Resilient Forest Organizer with Mountain True based in Western North Carolina. We also tackle parts of North Georgia, South Tennessee. My role specifically as the resilient forest organizer, although we focus on clean waters, healthy communities, and resilient forests, is to go into our 26 counties that we try to cover, organize those folks, and help them as a grassroots organization while we also do grass tops actions as well. And I'm going to try to hit the high points with the cutest critters. So first we're going to start with what we, Mountain True, are doing currently as far as some grass tops and grassroots. So one thing that we have done and have been pushing are these drafting of sample resolutions for different municipalities. That is something that we started in 2025 working on and sending out to everyone that we cover in the 26 counties, whether cities or counties themselves and being like, hey, we have already drafted this through the Southeastern Law Center or SELC. We have done all of the work for you. All that we need you to do is stand up in support of our forests and our public lands. Will you do this for us? And some folks never got back to us, which is fine. And then some folks followed through. One of those people are on this call. That is Dalton George with Boone. Thank you so much for standing up for our public lands. We also had places like Buncombe County, McDowell County, Henderson County, and then also smaller rural towns, areas that may not necessarily, you may not think would want to stand up for something like this. Maybe they're heavy red, we don't know. But either way, places like Boone, Silva, Franklin, and Hendersonville, all within North Carolina, and adapted these resolutions, which were incredible because that's people standing up, and that was coming from pressure that we were getting not pressure, but I guess we were hearing the advocations from our members, Mountain True members and community members. We believe in this and we want to stand up for this. And that was our direct action of, hey, we've got to go somewhere with this and we're going to put the pressure on you. And then that is letting people know where we stand. So yeah, from that, we'll move on down to partnering with other environmental organizations is another thing that we've been doing. This looks obviously like what I'm doing right now with these amazing folks. Originally partnered with the Sierra Club to do a People's Public Hearing in Asheville, North Carolina, where we busted out those postcards and we did verbal and written comments so people could come up on a stage in front of, at that attendance, we had 300 people show up to that one. A little over 300 people were fired up. The amount of things that I heard people say, like it made my soul light up because it feels so good to be around other people who are just as passionate and caring as much as we do. And so people were standing up, verbal comments, a lot of clapping, a lot of shouting, which is really exciting. And then we collected postcards written as well. Um, through we'll get to collaborating later, but the Sierra Club rules, love them, of course. And then places like the Roadless Rule National calls that I have been a part of. Dalton has now joined that as well. And I don't know if other folks have, but it's different organizations who are coming together on a national level to talk about everything that they're hearing, whether it's I heard this rumor or I know a friend who heard this or whatever. And we're just trying to keep our finger on the pulse of what we're doing, how other places are organizing, how we can support them and how they can support us, which has been really vital and important with the ways that we are trying to reach and get all of the tendrils out. I call it the octopus a lot of the times. There's so many different ways that we can get out there. Um, and then also with the Roadless World National Call, I would like to say that's through the Public Interest Network, and they're the ones, Lynn Montgomery specifically, who's hosting that. Anybody who's interested, I'm sure that we can share information. They have an incredible toolkit that I have linked that Dalton will point out later that has so much information, too much to get into right now. And then moving on from that, we're going to go straight to writing op-eds for the local paper. So for me, that is something that I feel has been very impactful to rural areas that we are trying to reach because I, originally from rural Eastern Kentucky, I come from a very small town where my papa taught my dad how to hunt. My dad taught me how to hunt on the same land. And there is something very deep and specific, just like we are talking about fly fishing. There's something that is very innate to our right. Our like we've taught like Chris was talking about, it's also like our heritage, it's our cultural right in a lot of ways. And I feel the same. And that is a way to appeal to a different person rather than, hey, I really like to go hike. It's not just about hiking. We have to remember it's about appealing to the masses. And writing for rural areas, hey, this is what my experience is with these roadless areas, and this is how this will be stripped from me and my family. It means a lot. And writing opinion pieces for your local paper is a way that you can also reach out and talk to these people. Um, so from that, moving on to, let's see, boom, collaborating with local political organizers. That's another way that Mountain True has been doing a lot of work. And for us, that is partnering with everyone across the board from the chair of the Macon County Democratic Party to Jackson Environmental Stewards, that's in Tennessee, the environmental action community. There's so many different ones that we have been partnering with again, just to support each other and how that works. And I'm trying to go fast because I know I'm going to say a lot of things. Moving on to number 5, which is one of the most important that we can do as organizers. And I'm looking at you, even though I'm not seeing you. Everyone on this call, they're here for a reason, and it's because you in some way care about this and want to organize behind this. And because you want to organize, one of the ways that I have consistently seen be so impactful is attending your county commissioners meetings, standing up, listen, talking to people, going to that public comment section and standing up and being like, hey, I heard about this. What are we doing? What is this county doing? What is the city doing to support this? Going back to the drafting samples of resolutions, those are also linked in the toolkit that you can use. Um, and as a quick caveat to what that looks like, one of the biggest things that we have seen through Mountain True is the Cherokee County's people resolution, which essentially was that county standing up and saying, hey, you need to protect public lands. And they started their own movement, Public Lands and Public Hands, that turned into getting over 4,000 petition signatures that they took to their county commissioners and said, hey, you need to protect this land and you need to stand up for this land. So I just think that's it. And for context, Cherokee County is a relatively rural area. Their two largest towns are Murphys and Andrews, and I think their populations are like 1,700 and 1,600. So when you're hearing almost five or over 4,000 signatures of that, it's a very significant number. And now we can jump on over to my next slide where we equally do things like Danny with the Sierra Club, where we are hosting our own people's resolutions, where we're asking people to come up and speak. We're asking people to write on our own cute little postcards that I have collected. So far, we've had 8 hearings locally in our areas. I think so far it's been well over 600 plus people who have attended through the 8, and we still have more coming because people continue to reach out and say, hey, I want to do this in my area. We've collected over 1,000 comments, whether those are written or verbal spoken comments collectively. And with that, we have countless comments that we have collected via roadless.org. So that is something a person on our board of Mountain True created that website, and he did it all just because of how passionately he feels as well. So there's just so many different ways that we have been organizing, but I'm also saying this to you in hopes that one of those sticks with y'all and you also really want to follow through with that and take this toolkit. Maybe reach out to me or somebody else on this chat and say, hey, how did I do that? Talk me through it. But I think I can stop talking or I'll just keep going.
No, that was awesome, Donovan. Thank you so much. And I will just say, I mean, those are beautiful postcards. I think they really put into perspective the wildlife that relies on these roadless areas.
Right.
Of course, the hellbender that is threatened and up for listing to be endangered, right, is one of those species, one of the species that rely on roadless areas and the clean rivers, that are protected by the lack of roads and industry. So great example. Getting a lot of love for the postcards in the chat too. So I'm going to talk briefly about national actions. Y'all should probably have the hang of this by now if you're on this list, right? And I also know what we're about to hit you with on the toolkit about these postcards. You get told all the time as somebody that loves wildlife and public lands, you really need to call and do this. And I know you're tired because I'm tired, right? But this will have an impact. I think it's easy to feel like when you're calling your federal electeds that it's just going into a black box or they're not listening. But there's a reason they haven't opened up public comment and made it easy. It's because they pay attention to public discourse, right? And that's why making our own and taking these opportunities, calling our elected officials is so important. And so, right, call your federal elected officials. We have a link that will help you figure out who that is and what number to call that you will have access to. Let the Forest Service know, right? These are the folks that are in charge. You can email those folks. There's information you can find online. Then ask for people to take a stand supporting the rule. So your own federal elected officials, if you think, okay, I've got somebody that supports it in general. We had Ossoff was named in the chat, right? They donate to Ossoff. They like Ossoff. Ask his office, hey, we know you support the roadless rule. Would you mind taking a public stand? Would you mind co-sponsoring a piece of legislation related to protecting it? Ask them to go that next step because the more our elected officials, the more our leaders are speaking out publicly about an issue, the more our community knows about it, right? The more it brings attention to it, and it makes it this kind of key value in Congress among these elected officials. So ask folks to take a stand. Leverage social media, right? People pay attention to that. Super important. Make some noise there. And then educate and share. Letters to the editor really do work. Recently, we were working on the ESA Amendments Act. Danny was actually with me. We had a little Southeast team. And one of the most fascinating things about watching a bill be pulled from the floor that was going to impact the Endangered Species Act was seeing the calculus these offices did to feel like, okay, this isn't going to get the support. Some of those offices were looking at letter to the editors from little small country papers, that probably you feel like 200 folks might read. And because they see their name in it, and your house rep's going to look through when you write this letter to the editor about how much you love the roadless rule and how you want them to take a stand. They have somebody in the office, believe it or not, that scans newspapers for name mentions of them. And they're going to go, oh my Lord, I'm mentioned right here, and somebody in my district cares about this. So I'm going to start paying attention. There's a ton of ways that you can impact it. And I feel like sometimes we don't give ourselves as individuals and our communities enough credit on the impact they can have on big national policy. And so we've got this lovely toolkit here that is going to have more links and you probably know what to do with. This will be sent to you in your inbox. So you kind of can go through this process and unpack it yourself. So we've got that map I was talking about of the roadless area. We've got some of those postcards and sample language right there. Here's how you can find your elected officials. And I'm going to put this in the chat because we might make a phone call in just a moment. Who knows? So y'all pay attention to that link if you don't know who your rep is. And then a call script, which is on here as well. I'll show you a sample local resolution. So what your local governments can do to support the roadless rule. It can kind of get you thinking that way. This is one I wrote for Boone here in North Carolina. There's another toolkit right there. And then there's a lot of information. So you can see some ecological importance through defenders, about it as a recreation asset from Trout Unlimited. They have an excellent email form on that link as well for you to send an email. Colleen, I love that. I know my elected officials, and boy, do they hear from me all the time, as it should be. And then more resolutions. And then, of course, the organizations you heard from, all of us. And we've got this call script here, which I'm going to leave up in a moment. And then some example letter to the editors. And so, folks, one of the things we love to do on these calls, and it can be a little awkward because I don't see all of y'all right now, but we like to kind of mute and make the phone call. My rep is Virginia Fox. So I was going to call her or call one of your senators if you're in one of these key states. and share that you support the roadless rule. You'd love to see them support it. And also, there is a bill currently that would codify the roadless rule. It's the 2001 roadless rule. Or where's the act at? I got lost in this. The
It's
Roadless
S,
Area Conservation Act,
yeah, S 2042.
S 2042. There we go. Um, Thank you, Danny. I usually bold when I'm supposed to read, and it was all bolded and it got lost in it. S 2042. That's not what I was meant to type. I'll trust you to type it. Congress is on breakout. But yeah, absolutely. I think it's a good practice. You'll get a voicemail, and I believe in getting the reps in. So let's all go leave a voicemail really quickly. I'm going to mute and do that. And then we'll come back and do a quick Q&A, y'all. I see Donovan's still chatting. So I'll use her as a good metric of when to wrap. But again, voicemails are easy, y'all. It's always good to get your reps in. That's what I like to say. Um, the Western Kentucky thing cracks me up, David. Um, and we'll go ahead and get ready for a quick. And then, yeah, senators, I would say, are just as important. I would call every federal elected about this. In some ways, depending on where you're at, your senator might be the most important person to communicate with about this, um, along with your community. And so, y'all, we talked about a lot, right? And our organizations do a ton of different things and a lot of different expertise and perspective in this room. And so, want to offer an opportunity for some Q&A and discussion. One of the things that I'll call back to that I remembered, I believe it was Elizabeth, that, let me see here. But please put questions in the chat while I'm trying to find this. Oh, yeah, it was Elizabeth. There we go. You said, I don't know if this really applies to me in my local area. I live in a suburb of San Francisco, right? We get our water from the Sierras, which is great water. I don't know if it would be something that our city council or our county board of supervisors would be interested in taking up. And that's great, right? Because not everybody's in a small town where you might run into your mayor at a grocery store and say there's a roadless area near us. And I will just say, one of the interesting experiences I've had as somebody that's been advocating on the Hill is these offices like to hear from a wide variety of voices and stakeholders in their community. And they hear a lot from constituents, but they also pay attention when they hear from local elected officials. So those county commissioners and those city council members. And it's a strategy that even within the Endangered Species Coalition, we're trying to leverage more for issues of biodiversity and conservation, all these things, making it this really core value and something that's flagged a lot. And so if you have a relationship or you think that somebody on your board, your local board, would resonate with this or identifies as a conservationist, there's a lot of value in asking, would you send a letter supporting the roadless rule and expressing concern? And you can even name, I recognize that this might not feel super pressing for this, but this impacts our entire nation, right? This is something that is national in scope. I just saw Danny come off of mute, so.
Yeah, I'll also add that there's a lot more to this than just the particular roadless areas themselves and where they're located. As Chris described, there was an extremely robust public process that took place to develop the roadless rule. And the process that they've taken to justify and propose a rescission is, in my opinion, lacking the the strong democratic processes that we rely on to ensure that our laws and regulations are sound and that they really represent the public. The public overwhelmingly supports roadless areas. I think it is absolutely fair to go to your elected officials, all of them, and to say that this is not what the public wants and that co-sponsoring a Roadless Area Conservation Act or issuing a statement that your local government will not act in violation of a roadless rule should it be rescinded. Uh, that's saying that they support the democratic processes that are really essential to protecting our natural resources and our own welfare.
So well said. Um, Ellen, I see your hands up. Would you mind putting a question in the chat for us? Awesome. I love to see people sharing their calling experiences. That is so exciting. Trying to look through for any questions I might have missed. Do you have a petition for us to use now? I know that we're sending links. There's an email form through Trout Unlimited. I don't know. Is there a petition being circulated through one of y'all's organizations?
I can say on our behalf and from everything I've heard through our national calls that there isn't a petition because we're relying heavily on the postcards and basically waiting on the public comment period, where I think that's kind of perceived as the petition of sorts, right? And I will say there are multiple different websites that I'm sure all of y'all could cite that you can go right now and go ahead and make the public comment. And whenever it finally opens, it submits it for you. I know roadless.org is currently doing that.
And we can add that to the toolkit. It's a Google Doc, so it's a living thing, which is awesome. And then Chris, I saw you come offer.
Just agreeing with Donovan.
Yeah.
I think most people are waiting for the proposal to come out, which should be out, frankly, soon, really soon. Um, and all of our organizations will have opportunities to sign petitions, and there'll probably be a big national one too at that point.
Yeah, and that reminds me to mention, I made a comment about how I'm holding on to the postcards that are addressed to the Forest Service until public comment opens. They will not consider any comments that are sent to them before or after the public comment period. So it's really ideal to make sure that you wait to send your comments to the Forest Service until that window of time. Um, and I've lost my other thought that I had.
But that was a great single thought that you had. So, and then I guess as we talk about this public comment period and it opening up, that's the one thing I will flag for everybody in here as well is pay attention to that when that public comment period opens up. If you're on our email list or any of these organizations' email lists, you will definitely receive some sort of notice that it has opened up. But that's another great opportunity to kind of sound the alarm and get people to pay attention.
I've remembered my other thought, just as a general comment about public comments and writing them. Sample language is very helpful for getting a sense of what the flow of your comments can be, some of the issues you can bring up. But I strongly urge people to write in your own voice and don't just word for word copy somebody else's language because they are looking for what they call substantive comments that are not sort of regurgitated generic language. They look for reasons, not always, but I'll say this administration is more prone to filter out what they consider non-substantive comments and not consider what you have to say. So being really thoughtful about how you frame your comments in a way that is very personal has a greater impact.
We've got a question about what would I do? What could I do that's meaningful if I live and pay taxes in DC? I would definitely say encourage you to connect with the folks that you know that don't live in DC and can do so. I also see Danny smiling because I know she's got somebody there that probably has some experience living in the DC area and doing a lot of advocacy. So I'm curious what your perspective would be, Danny.
Yeah, so portions of the Potomac actually flow through roadless areas. So you can use that to really ground your comments. And like what Donovan was talking about with local resolutions, those do matter. So you can reach out to the mayor of DC and request that they issue a local resolution in support of roadless areas and the roadless rule. I think that can have a lot of impact, especially with it being the seat of the democratic processes.
Okay,
And
and I'm one of those people on these calls that will admit that I don't know everything, and I did not know that about the Potomac. And that just goes to show if you live in DC, you're like, oh, I'm not connected to the roadless area at all. And that messaging opportunity, that storytelling ability right there, is so good. So Danny, thank you for that. I think that's just it's so. I think it's just a great example of how this national rule impacts everything, even if you don't realize it. Donovan, sorry, I cut you off.
No, 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 you didn't at all. I just wanted to jump in because I don't want it to get super lost in the chat, but there have been a few questions consecutively. When is the public comment period? Do we have dates for it? So just, I mean, I would love for, I'm sure Chris has plenty to say, but I would like to say, like, and I'm sure Danny as well, actually, we've been keeping the finger on the pulse. We've been told, I personally have been told in different calls, gosh, every other month it's opening next month. It's opening next month. It's opening next month. They're not releasing an address for public comments to be sent to because they keep saying it's going to open and it hasn't yet. So that's essentially what we are sitting on our hands with, right? I know Danny has a collection of postcards. I know I do. I know a lot of places all over the lower 48 who are just they're holding on to all these postcards waiting to put an address on it. We have no idea right now, but I will say from our last national call, and Chris referenced it earlier, it does seem like we have finally gotten to the point where we may actually see that comment period open potentially by the end of this month. Chris, you can speak more to this if you'd like, but that's what I've been hearing for y'all to know.
Yeah, and just there's been other questions that have come in. So this is a rulemaking that the United States Forest Service is doing, and so our comments will go to them. But comments to mayors and elected officials, be they representatives or senators, are really powerful and influencing on the Forest Service. And to Donovan's point, I literally heard today that the draft rule has left the Office of Management and Budget, where the so it's developed in the Forest Service, it gets approved or reviewed by the Department of Agriculture, where the Forest Service works, and then it goes to the Office of Management and Budget, and it's now apparently left there. So I think honestly the announcement will be imminent, and if form holds, it'll be about 4:30 on a Friday is when they'll announce it.
There's a great question from Elizabeth in the chat because it seems like there's probably a lot of decision makers in this process, and wondering if one of y'all want to take a stab at trying to clarify kind of the role of Senate and Congress, and then the Trump admin and public comment and Forest Service. How does this all intersect?
Yeah, I was trying to hit Elizabeth's good comment there, uh, Dalton. So the comments will go to the United States Forest Service, who work for the Department of Agriculture, but the reality is that those agent all the agencies in the Department of Interior and the Department of Agriculture, all of them, they're all beholden on funding from Congress, and so getting your member of Congress to register their complaint is really significant. Getting your local councilman, your local mayor, the mayor of DC, as Danny was saying, I'm looking at the Potomac River right now. Our drinking water comes from the Potomac, and the headwaters of the Potomac Highlands are in roadless areas in the Monongahela National Forest. So all of basically, I think the idea is to make as many ripples as we can. But the agency that the comments will go to is the Forest Service. But all of those other people, local councilmen, mayors, elected representatives in Congress, all of them make a difference.
Yeah, and just this is like a refresher on how a bill becomes a law, and it's confusing. And I don't think Schoolhouse Rock did us enough of a primer on the process. But there are regulations that our federal administrations execute, and that's where the roadless rule is. Regulations are fairly easy to repeal because they get proposed, they go through a public comment process, they get enacted. The next administration can go in and say, we're going to repeal this. They go through the public comment process, and that happens very quickly. In response to the Forest Service announcement that they intended to rescind the roadless rule, a number of lawmakers then went out, and there's actually two bills that are being sponsored in both the House of Representatives and in the Senate. And both of those came about in response to the announcement that they were going to rescind the roadless rule. And these bills would basically codify the regulation into law, which is substantially harder to overturn and is an act of Congress. And we've seen in this administration how hard it is to get Congress to agree to do anything. So going the asks really are twofold. One, ask the Forest Service not to rescind the existing regulation. And then two, ask your lawmakers, well, I guess there are more than two asks, but ask your lawmakers to protect that regulation in law so that it is really heavily in place and protected. And then the third thing is going to your local governments and asking them to support the roadless rule in a number of ways, in resolutions and things like that, because the local governments work with the federal agencies like the Forest Service. And so they do have influence over how a Forest Service agency will operate in a local capacity. So we're trying to get all the players collectively to buy in to the value of the roadless rule.
Excellent. And so the protection would be supporting voting for S 2042. And that's right, Elizabeth. And yes, the three steps, there's going to be a lot of different kind of ways. And honestly, this conversation helps inform how we can edit it and make it as easy to understand as possible. So we can definitely tweak it a bit for you. I know we're getting close to an hour and want to close out with some final thoughts from folks. The discussion was great. I guess I'll start on the closing us out. I just want to voice how powerful it is that people are taking time out of their evening to learn about something like this. And we're talking about things like public comment period and rescinding and rulemaking and all these different things. And, there's so many different places that you could be, but you care enough to show up and you want to learn and you see the value in this, not just for, habitat and environment, but for human health and community and so many other things. And so it gives me a lot of hope and it makes me feel really confident that when something is loved like this and supported like this, good organizing is really the antidote to it. And I say this all the time, organized people beat organized money. 100% of the time, you just got to be organized. You just got to put in the work. So I saw some folks saying, man, it feels like people don't listen to me, but I promise they absolutely do. We continue to get wins as an environmental movement and a conservation movement. Sometimes it just takes a little bit more work. And I guess I'll let Donovan.
Yeah, I echo everything you said. It's been a joy to sit on a panel with some amazing people and just relate to all of these other people in the comments who are just saying how much they care about this and what can I do? What can I do? I think that I hear that a lot from friends, family, people at the People's Resolution who show up not even knowing what the roadless rule is, but they know that they like to go out and hike. And then I've been coining the term, this is the most important bill you've never heard of, because so many people are like, what are you talking about? What? And I just am so thankful that all the people who showed up and are willing to stand up and do something for our lands, because they can't fight back the way that we can because we speak the language that they need to hear, which is, hey, stop it. You quit that. But thank you all so, so much. And I'll pass it to Danny.
Yeah, thank you for joining everyone. And I hope that if you were like, should I take action? What impact can I have? I hope that hearing from all of us will tell you that you definitely can have an impact and that the ripples of your individual action can be very great.
And Chris, wrap us up.
Yeah, I'll just close with the notion that for 25 years these lands have been prospected and or protected, and roadless areas are a vital aspect of what it means to be an American. And we should be really reluctant to allow those places to be taken away from us. As Donovan said, these pieces of our heritage, they're an actual part of who we are as Americans. We shouldn't allow that to be taken away. And so hopefully all of you will make your voices heard and encourage your friends and neighbors to do the same.
Great, y'all. Well, I hope everybody has a great night. I will be in contact with that toolkit. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out and support all these orgs you heard from. You'll have links on what they're doing, all the cool stuff, and give them the love and attention they deserve. But thanks, y'all. Hope you have a great night.